Let there be light. We finally have light. And there's a lot of light. In fact, what I'm gonna do, I'll see if this will work. I'm gonna take a photo of what I'm looking at here. I'm gonna put it in the blog post that goes along with this, but I'll see if I can then show you what it looks like because there's a lot of light. So if I go back here. All right, so here, for those of you who are curious, this will be interesting. This is how much light I now have. So, for the people that are actually watching the video, what I have got is 2 lights, actually 3 lights. We'll start with the 2. And I'm looking at the list here. I'm going to put the list of stuff I got in the blog post as well. 2 Fovitec Studio Pro Bicolor 600 LED panel bundle with barn doors and stands. So what you would have seen from the photo I just took is that they're big lights that sort of sit over to the sides of the desk. And you will also have noticed that they face the wall. We're going to talk about that more in just a moment. And there is one Yongnuo YN300 Air Pro LED for backlight, which is down there. Now, I've done a lot of mucking around trying to get lights working in a good fashion. They're not going to be perfect because I actually want to do cyber things as well as mucking around with lights. So I spent a lot of time during the week tweaking everything I possibly could. Turning up the brighter Kelvin and the lighter Kelvin, changing the positions, turning them around. They used to face towards me. And then people were like, no, like your head's all shiny, which I think may have been a euphemism, but anywho. So I turned them around. I used to have these in there as well. So there are these sort of partly transparent panels. These are actually the more transparent ones. There's less transparent ones as well. I'm meant to take the glare off. I've ended up taking those out because light's bouncing off the walls. I did a lot of iterations, excuse me, which people on the Twitters, so people were very helpful. Thank you for everyone that chimed in who said, no, try this or try that. Now, I've basically got to the point where I went, as I said, I have cybers to do and actual real work that I wanted to get on with. So I got it to the point where I thought it was pretty good. And instead of looking at the camera, if I look at the screen on the iPhone for a moment, I think it's pretty good. I've realized that it highlights everything. So when I have a crazy hair day, because I've just come from playing tennis and jumping in the pool, like you will see everything crazy. But I'm actually really happy with the result, particularly when you consider some of the struggles I had where the sun wouldn't be out, which is very unusual for here, or it'd be behind clouds. And I'd have to sort of compensate with light and stuff going all over the place. So I'm very happy with this. I'm going to talk just a couple more things, or talk about just a couple more things on the lighting front before I then go in and do the cybers again. Now, a bunch of people had suggestions about other things to buy. Thank you for your input. I appreciate that. I'm not buying any more shit. I sort of had this challenge where whenever you ask an opinion, you get lots of different ideas back. Which is great. And then what I got to do is I got to sort of take them out and aggregate them and find the best middle ground, whether that be with lighting or other techie security things. And the best middle ground was to get lights that I can leave permanently mounted in place on the sides of my desk. Because what that means is that all I got to do this video is put the blind down, because there's a blind over there, and start recording. And that's awesome. So people said things like, oh, you should have got a light ring, which would be a ring that goes around there, shines light, the camera sits in the middle. Now, the problem with that is that, A, it's one other thing to buy, but B, you really need to have a camera with a normal lens that sits in the middle of it. This is actually just an iPhone. And then it's a big device that sits in front of you. And I like to be able to see the screens and everything. And it was just more and more stuff. Just look at my notes here. It needs to be a practical room. So that's why I have the stands and everything. What else did I say? Please don't tell me all the other things I should have done. Just help me make the most out of what I have. I think that statement's probably fine. So because I've got a lot to talk about today on the other things, I want to move on. But if I can leave you with that, if you're looking at this and you go, there are obvious tweaks you could make, please let me know. Someone, in fact, I know who it was Sebastian Klein, Seb from Hack5, said, your certificates on the wall aren't all straight and my OCD is not happy. Which is why I have a spirit level in my office. So Seb, I hope you're happy, mate. Everything's straight now. All right, so yeah, any suggestions, please drop them in the comments on the blog post. Now, incidentally, I don't read the comments on the YouTube channel. Read a lot of comments on YouTube and you'll understand why. And to be fair, a lot of the comments on my YouTube page are very reasonable, but there is a very high ratio compared to my blog of stuff that is not. Now, moving on, cybers. It's May the 4th. So, or as we should apparently say it, the 4th of May. No, you want to say May the 4th, don't you? Because I hesitated because it's a very American thing, but then it does the Star Wars bit. Regardless, May the 4th here in Australia, which meant yesterday was the 3rd of May, which was the first Thursday of May, which apparently is World Password Day. Now, I am not one for having days which are meant to indicate things as it somehow implies that all the other days don't mean that, but be that as it may, it does get people talking about passwords and thinking about password things more. And it has been an interesting week for passwords right up until the last couple of hours before recording. So yesterday I was actually in Sydney. I was doing a presentation down at Manly Beach. Some of you will know Manly Beach. It's a nice beachy little spot. And one of the things that had happened just the night before I went down there is the Commonwealth Bank, which is one of our big four banks in Australia, big four. I believe it's actually the biggest of the big four. They had some data possibly fall off the back of a truck. Now, I think most places around the world have that same euphemism of falling off the back of a truck being stolen from somewhere. You know, I got a TV the other day, it fell off the back of a truck. This, however, allegedly maybe did actually fall off the back of the truck. And what appears to have happened here is CommBank has been decommissioning one of their data centers. They've got a bunch of old tapes with data on them. They've gone, okay, as part of the decommission, we've got to get rid of the tapes. We'll put them on a truck, and then the truck will go and dispose of them properly. And depending on the reports you read, it's anywhere from about 10 million to 20 million people or records. I suspect it's more records because we've only got 20-something million people in Australia anyway. Anywho, so truck heads off. Apparently that the tapes were then lost track of at some point. And this is sort of a really curious thing for many, many reasons. One is that this happened some years ago and it's just come out of the press now. So why the lead time? Well, one of the things that's happening in Australia at the moment is there's a Royal Commission on the banking sector. Because it turns out that banks can be dicks. And a bunch of them were not very, well, let's say, professional with the way they handled money and some of the advice they gave people. So there's a massive spotlight on the banking sector in Australia at the moment. So I suspect that this disclosure was driven by that. One of the accounts I read, and keeping in mind that this is still fairly early days, one of the accounts I read said about 150 people knew about this. And frankly, even if it was 15 people, to go some number of years without it being disclosed publicly, I think is a pretty good effort. So I wonder if there was a bit of that where they went, look, someone's going to find out sooner or later, it's going to get leaked, and we're going to look really bad, particularly in an era where we want more transparency in banking. You know, we got to disclose. So maybe it was that. Now, as to the data itself. So, one of the interesting things about that is data not encrypted at rest. And maybe there are good reasons for this insofar as legacy banking system, etc., etc. But data not encrypted at rest, we know what happens if that media device then gets disclosed. What could happen, allegedly. So there's that. And then the other thing, of course, is sending live, for want of a better term, readable data off-site in an unencrypted format. Because if something does, for argument's sake, fall off the back of a truck, there's no defense left. You're not going to be able to have any protection against someone reading the device. So that was an interesting story, and that sort of came up a few times yesterday when I did my talk. And then on the password front, scrolling forward to today, just in the last few hours, Twitter has popped up and said, a little incident on our end. We appear to have logged a bunch of your passwords in plain text. And it sounds like a bunch, could be hundreds of millions of them. And it's worthwhile sort of putting a little bit more context around this. And just for disclosure, I went and visited Twitter in San Fran about 6 weeks ago. And all my screen's just turned off. There we go. Kill the screensaver. Went and visited Twitter about 6 weeks ago. And there are some really, really smart people in there doing very, very good things. So, let us not for a moment think that this is because of just outright organizational incompetence or something. Obviously, something somewhere went wrong. and it seems to have been to do with the way they were logging. So look, we would have a lot of logging for processes like authentication. the OWASP top 10 has now got logging and monitoring as one of the top 10. So, you want to have a lot of logging and monitoring because that helps you identify fraud, look at malicious patterns that might happen with attempts to authenticate against services. What you don't want to do is you don't want to log the password in plain text when that happens. But inevitably, that's what has happened, and I can envisage how that might happen insofar as if they are logging all the attributes of the request, for argument's sake. Or if there is a framework somewhere where incidentally they didn't realize, but it's also grabbing the password attribute, which is meant to ignore the string password or a field with the string of password or something like that, name of password. And I guess the point is that this could very feasibly have been just a simple misconfiguration somewhere. So there's that side of it. The other side of it is that this is newsworthy. Let us not sugarcoat that. This is definitely newsworthy. However, apparently there is no indication of those passwords in the logs or the logs themselves having been disclosed anywhere. And I was just talking to a journalist about this just before I started this recording. And I said, there are so many websites out there storing passwords in plain text or MD5 with assault or something else terrible like that. Day in and day out, tens of millions of them. And I know because I see them in plain text. We're going to come back and talk about that a bit later. So this happens all the time, and it's not newsworthy as an event. It's not newsworthy as an event until it gets disclosed. And then you look at it and you go, well, that was really crap what they did. So I guess the point is that obviously they've screwed up somewhere in their logging. I would have... I'm trying to think of the right way to put this. I could have understood if they didn't disclose it. And I say that simply because if those logs and consequently the passwords were not leaked anywhere publicly, I could see a good case being made for it being non-disclosure worthy. Now, maybe they have done that because in the current environment of a lot of scrutiny on personal data, remember, we're only a few weeks out of GDPR as well. In this current environment, they may have gone, look, it's actually much better that we disclose this now because if we don't disclose it, even though we think we might not need to disclose it, and then later on someone finds out, it will look like we covered it up and it will be bad. Regardless, go and change your Twitter passwords. I will change my Twitter password, but I also have 2FA on my account. And remember, 2FA is the thing that saves your ass if someone else gets your password. So as much as I don't like to think of my password having been logged in clear text, it looks like it hasn't been leaked. And even if it was, you can't do anything with it anyway, because you're going to need to have the Authenticator app as well. So that's the Twitters and the passwords. Now, one of the joys of now having the light come at me like this, as you would have seen in the photo, is I've got all my screens spread out in front of me, my 4 screens, and they include the notes of the things I wanted to talk about, and I've just gone completely out of order because we just got carried away. But let me actually continue the password discussion, and I want to talk about 2 things to do with pwned passwords that have been happening really just over the last 24 hours that are both awesome. Number 1, EVE Online, the game, the big, massive game, is using pwned passwords to check whether a password has appeared in a data breach. I believe at the moment just when people change their passwords, and I think that may roll out broader later on. But this is awesome. They are hitting the K-anonymity API, so they're just sending the first 5 characters of the SHA-1 hash of the password to the API endpoint. They're telling people if they have used a password that has appeared before, and that is resulting in people hopefully going and changing their password. I'm not sure if they're forcing a change or just saying, not a good idea that you use this one. But it's hopefully leading to very positive changes in behavior because gaming platforms are massive targets for account takeover. Not least of which because you've got a lot of kids in there, and kids can be devious little bastards. And also, because you've got a lot of kids in there, there's a lot of them going to be using very bad passwords. Actually, I would love to see some empirical evidence of how bad password choices are by demographic. It'd be really interesting to see, are kids more prone to having really bad passwords? EVE Online, if you're listening, you may actually be able to tell us this. So this is interesting, and one of the guys involved in the implementation of this has been tweeting publicly about it, which is why I can talk about it. And we've been talking privately as well, and I'll wait until they're ready to share information about that implementation, but I'm just really happy with what they've done, and I'm just super stoked to see something like pwned passwords, which is there for free, get used in a really positive way to improve people's security. So I'm stoked about that. On that front, today, 1Password has pushed out to the web-based client of 1Password the ability to go and check every single one of the passwords in your keychain in one go. This is awesome, and this is actually something that we've been working on for a little while, because there were some little nuances around how do we send enough async requests to the endpoint, like what's the right balance of how multi-threaded it should be, etc. I'm really happy to see this in the web client, because what it means is you log onto the web client, you go to Watchtower, and then it says, hey, there's a button here. If you'd like, you can check all your passwords. Now, the cool bit of the implementation is because 1Password never actually sees your password in the clear on their server, everything's encrypted, there's a private key derived from the master password that only goes into your client. This is really important because some people get worked up about password managers. I know, worked up on the internet, who'd have thought it? They get worked up and they go, 1Password, for example, or other password managers with any sort of server-based sync can see your password. It's game over if someone there goes rogue. Well, no, they can't. Not unless you compromise the entire pipeline of their software somewhere, and a whole bunch of other stuff has to happen for that to be a problem. So the cool bit about it is it runs entirely in your client. So I posted a tweet later on, and of course in this case the client's the browser, posted a tweet earlier on where I showed, I went into my 1Password account, I used the Cloud Sync one, and incidentally I used that so that I can do things like actually share passwords with my wife, which is really important. Passwords, financial information, bank account stuff, awesome for that. So anyway, you go in the browser, into Watchtower, and you go check all my passwords. And I opened up the dev tools and you can see all of the requests coming from my client with the first 5 characters of the SHA-1 hash of the password. So if you want sort of a nice sort of evidence-based analysis of the fact that they're not looking at your password and the fact that I never get the password on pwned passwords, go and check that out. Now, I was surprised, this is the embarrassing bit, I was surprised when I ran this that I actually had something like 27 passwords found in the pwned passwords list. And at first I saw that and I went, oh, this isn't going to be good. like what have I done? And then I realized it broke down into several different categories of account. Number 1, banks and airlines that expect you to have a PIN. If you've got a PIN, it is in pwned passwords. I should check. I should actually make sure that every single, let's say, 6-digit combination of numbers is in there. It's almost certainly going to be in there. Certainly, I found banks and airlines, yes, they're in there. Because what's your entropy when you got like 4 characters? Well, yes, there's 10,000 entries for different passwords in there. The other one I found was I've got a bunch of dummy accounts that I have used throughout various web blogging things in the past. I think one of them, for example, I was going to say the company name, I won't say it. One of the companies I did write about and I created a really bad password on, that is in the pwned passwords list, and I had that stored in 1Password. The third category was a bit more interesting because I did actually have a small handful of accounts out there using a bad password. And the reason why is that I think when I originally migrated over to 1Password, I just started chucking everything in there, and then I started changing the most important passwords, and I just went down and down and down until I got maybe out of time. so there was some stuff left, which was never changed. So this is the awesome thing about it. Now, I could have gone into the client and always ordered by password strength, because I've had a password strength meter in there for a while and found them. But I got to say, even for me, and I say a lot of passwords, even for me, it was quite different to actually see this exact password has been seen before in a data breach. So anyway, I got some work to do. I might change that while I'm doing my Twitter password. So go and check that out because that's super awesome. And I've already seen a bunch of people say, look, we're actually going to migrate to 1Password because now you can do this. And they're going to migrate from some other password manager. Now, I'm happy to see that insofar as, obviously, I want this model to be successful for 1Password. I want to see organizations using the pwned password set, actually having that as a feature which drives people to them. So that's first and foremost. Obviously, I've got the partnership with 1Password with Have I Been Pwned as well, and everything that I do that helps them do what they do better is obviously better for the relationship too. So that's also good. But honestly, first and foremost, I'm just super stoked to see people saying this is actually valuable. The pwned password bit's valuable, and they're using it. So kudos to 1Password for that, and kudos to people who are now actually going and checking all of their passwords. Okay, so that was that. Now let me move on to the blogging stuff, because I think that's most of the newsworthy things. 3 blogs this week, so I actually got a lot done. I got a big backlog of stuff that I'm still ripping through, and I got a huge amount of things that are just like partially done that I do want to complete. But let's start with SRI and upgrade secure requests in Microsoft Edge. Now, this is how we're going to put this. Firstly, I don't work for Microsoft, because normally when I talk about Microsoft in any way that would allow someone to make disparaging comments, they say, hey, Troy, you guys at Microsoft should do a better job, and they spell Microsoft with a $sign. And yeah, basically, once you start spelling the name like that, I'm pretty much going, well, the chances of us having a balanced discussion are probably not real good right about now. Be that as it may, I didn't get any of that feedback, which surprised me a bit. So here's the bottom line. There are a bunch of security features, open security features, standards within the spec, which Microsoft Edge does not support. Did not support. There are other things that Edge does exceptionally well, but things like SRI and upgrading secure requests have not been 2 of them. Now that has all changed as of Edge 17, which shipped in the April Windows 10 update. Last day of April, because we are May now, of course. So I just went into my, in fact, what I did, I wanted to sort of do the before and after. So I went into my laptop, went into Edge, and I checked, first of all, SRI. Now remember, SRI is sub-resource integrity. This is the thing that gives you the ability to say, I would like to embed a JavaScript file from somewhere else. So for example, from Cloudflare's CDN, and it's jQuery. I want to make sure that if Cloudflare changed that file somewhere else, it doesn't maliciously change what happens on my site. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get, say, the SHA-256 hash of that jQuery file, put that as an integrity attribute on my script tag. When a supporting browser sees that, downloads the file, it says there's an integrity attribute, hashes the file, compares it. If they match, you're good to go. If they don't match, the browser rejects it and won't run it. The reason why this works so well is it allows you to say, I want to put my script files somewhere else, such as on a CDN. And I would like to then embed them in my site, but I want to make sure they don't change. Works beautifully for that. Now, on that front, so I'll finish the story. So I went and tested that. I set up a little test page. I've linked to that in the blog. You can go and experience it yourself as well. Snap the before shot, Edge 16, SRI did not work. Edge 17, which, Windows Update, take the things, wait for a while. It works beautifully. So fully supported now in Edge. On this front, this inevitably leads to the discussion about embedding things from external sources. And every time I talk about SRI, there's always 1 or 2 or 3 people who pop up and say, well, you should never embed anything from an external site. And I'm sort of going, well, I see what you're saying. You're saying that you are putting an enormous amount of trust in the external site, but this is what SRI fixes. And then they go, well, you shouldn't do that because in the case of like Cloudflare CDN, they can start tracking people. And, I had a couple of discussions over the years where I've been talking about SRI where people raise this. And they seem to entirely neglect that this is always a balancing act where, on the one hand, if Cloudflare wanted to, they could track the requests, they could track the IP addresses, they could track your movements. There is no indication they're doing this, as far as I know. And I'm pretty sure if I looked for it, I'd find a statement saying they don't. But, yeah, the thing that this weighs off against is you're saying, well, when I use a CDN, we get to load content, which first of all is globally distributed. So maybe your origin site just runs off one physical location. You don't have it globally distributed because it sits behind a service like Cloudflare. And then suddenly, just by virtue of embedding this jQuery library from a globally distributed CDN, it loads faster for everyone. if someone's seen it on one site, so for example, they've gone to troyhunt.com, I think I've got Font Awesome on there, it's exactly the same file as on Have I Been Pwned. So now you've already seen it and it's cached. And then the big one, and I think people particularly neglect this, is you cut down the bandwidth costs. So suddenly the amount of bandwidth which comes from your service goes way, way, way down because you're loading it from someone else's service and they're paying for it. And I wrote very on with Have I Been Pwned how I unexpectedly paid for like 30 gigabytes worth of jQuery, which starts to cost money on Azure, in one day because of the fact that it loaded from my own site and not somewhere else. So there's that. And then, people say, well, but if your site is behind a CDN like Cloudflare, then you can serve jQuery from your site and it'll get globally distributed anyway. But then you're already behind Cloudflare and then they can track you anyway. So it's kind of like there is just not a conclusion which makes sense for the argument about let's not serve jQuery or JavaScript files from a CDN. And, this is in an era where we're dealing with things like plain text passwords in log files and banking data falling off the back of the truck. And the discussion you want to have is that maybe a CDN possibly could track you when they can already track you anyway if your site's... It's just like in the priority list. Anyway, let's move on from that. So SRI, fully supported by Edge now, which is cool. So it means that you can very happily embed script from an external source for whatever reason and have confidence in the integrity of it. Now, the other one was upgrade insecure requests. And upgrade insecure requests is actually part of CSP level 2. And Edge has had CSP level 2 support, but it didn't implement that particular directive. Now, that directive is the one that allows you to serve a page over HTTPS, and then even if you screw up the embedded content within there and you try and embed it over HTTP, when that page returns the upgrade insecure request directive in the CSP header, everything beneath there gets magically upgraded. It is awesome. It should be on every single site, because when you do that, even if you make a mistake and you embed something insecurely, it gets fixed. You get to keep your browser little padlock. If you're in Chrome, you get to keep the green bits as well. All of that stays. Even better than that, if you're using, say, a service like Discuss. So I have Discuss on my blog. A couple of years back, Discuss, which I embed over HTTPS, started embedding something all the way down their pipeline of scripts and iframes and everything, started embedding something over HTTP. That caused me to lose my padlock. Actually, no, you know what? I got to keep the padlock, but because it was a script on the right-hand side of the browser, so that'd be your right over here, there's a little shield with a red icon. So I got a visual security warning. So what's actually happened here is by having upgrade insecure request, it cascades all the way down to every dependency. So upgrade insecure request is awesome. That's now fully supported in Microsoft Edge as well. Now, even if you don't use Edge, this is still important. And the reason it's still important is because it means the adoption rate of all of these things will go up. Because I've had lots of discussions with people before where they've said things like, well, we could use SRI, except what's going to happen then is all the people on the Microsoft browsers don't get any support for it. So that argument's going to go away. And obviously it's going to take a while for Edge to become, or Edge 17, to become the dominant Microsoft browser. But it's going to happen over time, and it starts to change the discussion. Because as of now, we can say every major browser manufacturer is now supporting SRI and upgrade insecure requests. All right, so that's that. Go and use those two things. They're absolutely awesome. And even if you don't trust CDNs, you can still use upgrade insecure requests. I don't think anyone's complaining about that, other than the HTTPS naysayers, and I'm not getting into that discussion today. Next one, pwned passwords again. Now, I mentioned pwned passwords earlier on, 1Password, EVE Online, etc. Everyone's using that, which is cool. I was curious, of the 500 million and a bit passwords that are in pwned passwords, if we were to use that corpus of strings, because this is all they are, right? The strings. If we were to use that and look at a site storing passwords, normal site, how many passwords in that normal site would already be in the pwned passwords list? And I got to be honest, my gut feel was around a quarter. I was thinking, 20, 30%, something like that. Now, I needed a use case to test this. So I needed a data breach which had passwords in plain text, and I got one courtesy of CashCrate. CashCrate went into Have I Been Pwned, I think about a couple of weeks ago. They had about 2.2 million passwords stored in plain text. A bunch of them in MD5 as well, because I think they were rolling over, but that's another story. Now, what I did is I took those 2.2 million passwords, put them into the database where I do all the pwned password management stuff, and I did a join. And I said, okay, well, how many of them are in there? Bottom line is 86% of the passwords in CashCrate were already in Have I Been Pwned, in the pwned passwords part of Have I Been Pwned. And obviously that shocked me. I didn't think it'd be that high. I actually put out a poll on the Twitters the day before I published this. I said, how many passwords do you think will be in there? 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%. Most people said 60%. So 80% was less than half of the votes. So I think this will probably be a surprise to most people. So when you think about what that means, it means that assuming CashCrate is indicative of a normal everyday website, and of course they've all got different demographics and different periods of history where there are different policies and that sort of thing. But even if we take for a moment, say 50%, imagine 50% of the people in your database, those of you who manage websites, are using a password which is already out there floating around. Like that's hard. That's why EVE Online is doing what they do, because this is what people do. They reuse these passwords extensively. And now we've got a number to demonstrate this. The next time I see a plain text data breach, I'll run the same test again, assuming there's like 1 million plus records, because you need a pretty good spread. I'll be really curious to see what those results show. But honestly, if you're not using something like pwned passwords now, like really think about doing it like tomorrow, because I think you might get a bit of a shock. Go and look at how EVE Online does it. They do a good job. All right, so that was amazing. Now, next thing here is there's a new Pluralsight course, and I wore the Pluralsight shirt especially for this. And the Pluralsight course is a JavaScript play-by-play. So these play-by-plays are the ones where there is a camera on two people, and the two people are having a conversation, and the play-by-play records that. They're very loosely scripted. So when I do a play-by-play, I have maybe 2 A4 sheets of bullet points, and that would be it. Sometimes I prepare some demos and things in advance, but that's the run sheet, as compared to a normal Pluralsight course where it could be a 20-page document with very fine detail about what I'm going to say. So they're conversational, which makes it very easy to watch. They're normally about an hour. This came out at 1 hour and 13 minutes. And I did this one with Aaron Powell. Some of you may know Aaron as Slace on Twitter. And Aaron's a good mate of mine. He's down in Sydney. Aaron is actually the guy that introduced me to Pluralsight in the first place. And I remember back in 2012 when I was seeing news about some authors, guys like Scott Allen, doing really well on Pluralsight. I was like, man, I gotta get into this. Like this might give me a way out of the corporate life. And of course it did. So yeah, big thumbs up to Slace for that. Definitely owe you some beers for that one. Thank you, mate. So we sat down there and spoke about JavaScript security. And it actually took a different direction to what I was originally thinking, which is good because he is the JavaScript guru and there's a lot of stuff in there that I had no idea about. So we talked a lot about, I'm going to drill into what I said in this blog post now. We talked a lot about things that I am very familiar with, things like cores, third-party library dependencies. We also spoke about things like, what else did we get into? Service workers. I really hadn't looked much at service workers before. Had some good sort of philosophical discussions around identity persistence. So if you're using bearer tokens, should they go into local storage or cookies, or, what is the model for these things? Just sort of ran through a bunch of different stuff, bunch of different demos. Early feedback is very positive, so thank you to the people that have commented on that. That's been good. And it is now out there as a play-by-play on Pluralsight. So that's there. It is behind the paywall, so it's part of the Pluralsight subscription, which I think from memory still starts at like $29 a month or something, so less than $1 a day. And I think pretty sure you get about 10 hours for free. so just go and try the free one. You can watch the course. And then if you like it, hopefully you'll subscribe. So that's all of those things. Now, last couple of things. So first of all, sponsor this week is Tech Fabric, who are building reliable and secure and scalable cloud-native apps. And they have been a sponsor several times before as well. Very happy to have those guys back. I've actually noticed a couple of other people doing cyber things and blog things, doing the sponsorship model as well. And I am enormously happy to see that. I'm just happy to see that this is something that is sticking, and it's helping people create good relationships with companies. Companies like Tech Fabric, who were they? Tech Fabric are supporting people like myself. And of course, the thing that we're all very happy about is not seeing those nasty ads with all the deep links and the tracking and the crazy things and the hijacking of the browsers. So good not to see any of those as well. So I think that is pretty much it so far. I'm going to have to watch this video again and see how the lighting and everything looked, because I just look at the camera and there's just like a blur of me, which is my face in the screen. If you have watched this far, please do give me some comments on this. Let me know what I can do better without buying more stuff. One thing that does immediately come to mind is I'm going to turn the air conditioning on next time, because it turns out that 600 LEDs, even reflecting off the wall, do tend to warm the room up a little bit. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this has been a good improvement to these videos. I do have more things in mind that I'd like to try and do in the future as time permits. Keep the feedback coming. Thanks very much, guys. I will come to you next week. Oh, next week I'm going to have Scott Helm here. So Scott is coming to Australia on Tuesday, and he's going to be here for the NDC security event the week after. So I'm going to do it with Scott next week, because people liked the one with Scott so much last week. If you have suggestions of things I should do to him as he arrives in Australia, anything involving snakes, spiders, jellyfish, sharks, crocodiles, etc., I will take those suggestions in the comments, and we'll see how that works out next week. Thanks, guys. See you later.